would ask that our next presenter come forward, and that is Joel Usher. Please come forward. Make yourself comfortable. You have 5 minutes to address our committee, and then they will ask you some questions. Please begin by stating your name and start any time.
Hello, my name is Joel Usher. Hello, committee and everyone in attendance today. Thank you for having me here to present. I'm a proud husband and father. I reside in Newcastle, Ontario, which is a commuter town located in the east end of Durham region. I acknowledge that I am a person with many privileges. I am in good health and of a gender, sexual orientation, skin color, and religion that faces no systemic discrimination in Ontario. Further, not only did I grow up in a middle-class household where both my parents worked full-time with good wages, but now my son finds himself in the same advantaged situation. I could continue with the list, but I believe you get the idea. I was at the Evan Root Centre in Peterborough when Buckhorn's Kathy Katula, the single mother with a disability who is literally having to choose between heating and eating, told our Prime Minister that he is failing her. I mention her specifically because her story was profound and became quite well known. We all know that other sad and sometimes tragic electricity stories too. A couple of others that came to mind as I was preparing include a friend of mine from Owen Sound told me that her local butcher shop, a small business called Cottonese, was forced out of business. One of the reasons cited was high electricity costs. Last year's story about Kenny Taylor, the Curve Lake man whose electricity had been disconnected. He was killed when his generator, which had been running around the clock, exploded. The simple reality is that the privileges I have are not shared by all. Many of my fellow Ontarians face day-to-day challenges that I am unable to relate to. They don't have the time to research our electricity system for hours on end or show up here at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday and give a deputation. I am not okay with any of Ontario's basic utilities being used to widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Bill G-132, an act to enact the Ontario Fair Hydro Plant Act 2017, more electricity legislation. I'm sure you all recall our former public power at cost system. It endured some very significant world events, the development of the automobile industry, the emergence of air flight, World War I, the Great Depression, the Industrial Revolution, World War II, and the Digital Revolution, to name just a few. Sadly, it failed to survive the neoliberal agenda and related electricity legislation that gradually eroded that system into, respectfully, the complex and expensive electricity mess we have today. I am nearly certain that this committee will hear plenty about the leaked cabinet document, the 6.5% annual rate increases between 2022 and 2027, and the 10.5% rate increase in 2028. To me, this bill seems to be about burdening ourselves for the long term for the sake of some short-term relief. I also find the timing of the relief proposed by this bill to be somewhat conspicuous. By comparison, the clean energy benefit, a 10% electricity rebate, was implemented just prior to the 2011 provincial election. It ended in 2015, and then less than 2 years later, the 8% HST electricity rebate came into effect. The Financial Accountability Officer pointed out that the $1 billion per year cost of the 8% HST rebate would have helped more low and modest income Ontarians if one half of that money was instead being invested in the already up and running Ontario Electricity Support Program or the Ontario Energy and Poverty Tax Credit. My own experience tells me that while many Ontarians grasp that their electricity bills are a lot higher than they used to be, few understand our electricity system's complexities. Unfortunately, that is despite our Ontario Energy Board Act, which says the board, in carrying out its responsibilities under this or any other act relating to electricity, shall be guided by the following objectives. One of those listed, to promote the education of consumers. Since we're considering amending the OEB Act, my suggestion is to make this clause more robust and quantifiable, with quantifiable education targets and substantial penalties when those targets are missed. A more educated public would demand better and would have the capacity to offer realistic suggestions. As mentioned, I have been researching this material for hours on end. It is for that reason that I have a few more proactive suggestions to offer as well. Repatriate every little bit of Ontario's electricity system. Make it all public. Just focusing on Hydro One is not enough. When a private green energy contract can be torn up, tear it up. The contract with the Samsung Consortium comes to mind. Number two, take advantage of advancing battery storage technology. Doing so will remove the potential for overloading our grid and will therefore nullify the global adjustment fee and end the process of us literally paying private electricity producers to not generate power. Number 3, give municipalities, communities, neighborhoods, and individuals more control over their electricity needs, not less. Number 4, find a way to fulfill Sir Adam Beck's dying wish, a public power at cost electricity system that is entirely protected from politicians. I hope that I've been successful in giving you some citizens' perspective and maybe even something new to contemplate. On behalf of this Ontarian, thank you very much for your time, consideration. I look forward to your questions. And I just wanted to say, Sir Adam Beck, he had his...
That's time. Thank you very much. Our first questions for you come from our NDP caucus. Mr. Tabbins.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Usher, thank you for coming in this morning. You had a few more things to say. If you want to finish off, please.
Thank you. Sir Adam Beck, he had a Latin quote. I'm not quite able to make it out, but ultimately, the gifts of nature belong to the people, and that's what the translation works out to.
Thank you. And from what you've said, your direction or your inclination is to say that we need to deal with the structural problem of privatization if we're actually going to bring prices under control. Do I understand you correctly?
Absolutely, 100%.
And so you see the sell-off of Hydro One as part of the problem that we're going to be facing with higher hydro prices here in Ontario.
That's one piece of the problem. The entire electricity system has had privatization in through it, and Hydro One is definitely a big piece of that.
And you're aware that the Liberals' hydro borrowing plan is going to result 4 years from now in prices going up almost 7% a year for almost a decade.
Yes, and that upsets me a great deal.
How do your neighbors feel about that?
My neighbors are largely unaware of what's going on. Occasionally somebody would read in the paper what's happening, but beyond that, they don't know the complexities. It's that whole underfund and then complicate, underfund some more, frustrate, privatize. That we're seeing that trend not just in the electricity sector but elsewhere as well.
And I imagine that if your neighbors knew that their prices were going to shoot up sharply after 4 years, that they would not be supporting this plan. Is that reasonable to say?
I think that if they knew the insides and out of what was happening, they would be in the streets.
Okay. I don't think I have further questions. Thank you very much again for taking the time to come here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much. Our next questions come from Mr. Delaney.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in. Just a few fairly quick questions. Eliminating coal from our generation mix, in your opinion, that's a good idea?
I think that's part of the solution.
Okay. Sharing the costs with future generations rather than leaving it as it is to allow people for the next 10 or 15 years to pay 30-year costs. You think that's a good idea?
I think that we should be paying what it costs today, not putting it on future generations.
Do you buy your house that way?
I would if I could. I absolutely
Okay,
would.
that answers the question. Are you in favor of reducing bills by 25% for ratepayers in Ontario?
No, not
Thank
with
you
this
very
current
much,
plan.
Chair. Those are our questions.
Thank you. And our final questions for you are from Mr. Walker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Usher, and certainly Cottney's Niece was a sad day in Owen Sound when it closed, and I think sadly there's many more that could. I shared yesterday with the committee that many of the small independent grocery stores are not eligible for the 8%, so that adds burden to them. They're not certain about the 17%. Today with the Fiscal Accountability Officer, he actually shared with us that the cost to do this scheme could actually be $69 billion to $93 billion. So you made reference to your son, and I trust that you're probably concerned that this does not do anything to address your son's future in a positive manner. Is that fair?
That's fair.
The member cut you off when he asked the question of you don't agree with the 25% rate increase. Do you want to finish your comment that he didn't allow you to finish?
I absolutely don't agree with the rate decrease being done the way that it's being done. What we're doing is we're just playing the shell game. We're moving money from one place to another place. There's a lot of crossover between electricity consumers and the tax base, as we know.
So can I extend on that you're not really in favor of a short-term 25% relief, that's going to actually cost you millions and billions down the road, and more importantly, your son's generation and possibly the generation after that, particularly if we keep repeating these errors.
Yes, we're not fixing the problem whatsoever.
I think you suggested that you're suspect of the timing, that this might, you didn't say these words, but I'll throw them out there, that this might be an electioneering ploy.
Yeah, it's you know, the clean energy benefit all over again from 2011.
And were you aware that the day after that they announced this plan and the supposed rate relief, that the government actually signed more green energy contracts for power that we don't need?
That really upsets me. I wasn't aware of that. Most of my reading on that issue, I know there's many of them, has been on the Samsung consortium, and it was Vic Fideli
Yes.
who identified that added $1.2 billion expense that we're incurring because we, instead of tearing up that contract, we renegotiated
Which
it.
we could with no penalty, frankly. And you
Right.
talked a lot about Sir Adam Beck, and I don't know if you're aware that we actually spill water, we vent steam at our nuclear plants. And we actually paid, not gave away, we paid $6 billion as a government to other jurisdictions to take our surplus, which makes them doubly competitive, so the Cottonies meets, or on a larger scale, many of our manufacturers along the border could go. It baffles me. Are you concerned that this bill does nothing to actually address the systemic costs of power and hydro in our province?
Yes. I mean, when I step back and look at the big picture, we need to do something about what's being done. The last speaker talked about the lead underground wiring. Rather than replacing that, which is going to be costly, why aren't we just moving to a different form of distribution, a different network altogether? We talk about the energy cloud all the time. There's battery storage technology that exists that's now feasible. Instead of investing in replacing these lines and wires, especially lead systems, why not?
Mr.
make
Usher,
something
thank you
better?
very much for appearing before this committee. I would ask that